Why do we just accept that companies will do whatever they want with our data? The system doesn't need an update. It needs a rewrite.
All opinions expressed by hosts and podcast guests are solely their own opinions. Hosts and podcast guests may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
Like Coinbase straight up said it, right? Like I forget when, but it was like on the order of like 2 or 3 months ago. Was like, hey, we got a Wells notice. Like everybody's like, all right, this is gonna like happen, right? Like, so this wasn't super surprising. I think people were like upset about the names that were like mentioned as like securities in the thing, but I don't know. They had to like put something.
Dan, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's just start with performance. Over the past 3 months, stocks are up, depending on the S&P or NASDAQ, 10 to 19%. Bonds are up 1 to 2%. And Bitcoin's up 26%, ETH's up 18%. That's over the past 3 months. So we're thinking more short-term or medium-term here. If you had known the headlines before they were coming out, I'm not sure you would have thought that the crypto prices would have held up as well. We've got huge headlines across the market. So let's check in with you and see what's going on right now.
Yeah. I mean, like most of the carnage has been in the longer tail of stuff. I mean, that's like kind of like a function of the SEC sort of hitting everything that isn't Bitcoin or ETH in some capacity, or at least like throwing a lot of like question into it and whether or not they will bring action. So that's like driving, like, so Bitcoin and ETH are a little bit like in their own world. Bitcoin in particular, like Bitcoin's like the most definite one that like doesn't have SEC purview. ETH is probably the closest second, though like that obviously comes into question at times, though it seems pretty solidified in my mind that like that's fine. So they're okay. Everything else is like really just like getting like pummeled, especially over like the last like week or so, after they brought the Coinbase and Binance actions. But yeah, I mean, like, look, like stuff's like all sure, but like it's off like a pretty depressed level, like from the lows. Like we haven't gone lower than like the FTX sort of like sell off. And like that was a low print on Bitcoin. I don't know what it was, like 15 or something like that. And ETH like under 1,000. Like that seems to have be in the past for us, though you never really know. So like that's definitely been the catalyst, is like we haven't gone to new lows. But like that being said, like the rest of like sort of the industry like hasn't put in new lows, but it's getting clobbered pretty hard, especially like in Bitcoin terms, like in everything. So there's definitely been sort of that dynamic going on, and then there's going to be some like forced de-risking from like some market participants that like can't structurally hold those names while they're like under questions. Like that's like been a problem. But yeah, like that's like the immediacy that we sort of like seeing it all.
So Friday night, was it Friday night or Saturday night where that big dump?
It was Friday night.
So Friday night, market closes, and then the alts drop 30 to 40%. Like it seemed like a big mega trade. What were your takes on that?
So there's a couple things that hit the tape, like, but they weren't at that time frame. So the exact time of like why stuff sold off was like a little unclear. But so the Robinhood said that they were going to have to sell the or not sell, but they were going to like give users the ability to like withdraw or sell like the assets such as like Matic, Solana, ADA, sort of like a handful of stuff. And they were going to, either way, you're going to have to get off Robinhood, right? So they were like delisting them. So like that, and then like people started doing the math of like, right, like what percentage is going to get sold? What percent of this is going to like withdraw? Like people like, look, like if you delist it, people like just chuck it. Like they just like don't want to deal with it, or they don't want to take delivery. They don't want to fund another exchange. So like that's like some pressure, but like the bigger issue is like, all right, like this is happening with Robinhood now. Like what's like the other potential players that like have the same logic, and they're like, all right, like this thing's like in SEC crosshairs, like we can't like hold it like structurally. SoFi I think did the same thing with their sort of same basket of names. So yeah, like that like just like forced like a big sell off in like a lot of alts. But it's like I don't have like a real catalyst. Like it just like it happened at that time. Like the tape was weak, and then I think it just hit a pocket of licks. And like people blew up, like a lot of deleveraging happened, like a lot of like forced liquidations, and, like stuff wicked down, and then like it sort of bounced back a little bit, but like still below where it was like going in Friday night. But like I haven't heard of at least like anything in particular that like pushed it off. There's been like a lot of movement of those coins to exchanges, but like that's sort of you expect, and like we did expect some stuff to get like sold off, but I don't know, like in terms of like why it like pushed that hard that fast at that time. It's like I don't know. Stuff's so illiquid right now. It could really just be like one counterparty just being like, hey, like we have to like chuck a couple $100 million of like exposure, and like that would do it. Especially like in those names, like the liquidity is like pretty terrible. And it's going to be worse probably going forward. Like it's been getting like worse, like kind of every week for this year, but it's going to take a material digger, I think, now that like the exchanges are named in these actions. So anyway, like that combo of stuff just like pushed it down like really fast.
And so we've talked in the past that with the banks exiting the space, the problem of major money movers to be able to create and redeem over the weekends or at night potentially change this market to trade more traditionally. So is it normal to see like that low liquidity over the weekend, or is that just at an all-time low?
It's a couple of things. Like the liquidity is always like worse on the weekends, but then it's even worse because at least it seems that some of the market makers who like straddle TradFi in some capacity or have like some exposure to like other asset classes, but also like provide liquidity in crypto are either exiting or like scaling back materially, or at least like definitely like cutting exposure to venues and like how much they have out there. So that's just like been a reduction in liquidity everywhere. Like it's just like the books are just more liquid. But this has sort of been a trend that's going on for a while. I just do think like Coinbase and Binance having these actions against them has just accelerated a little bit of it.
So it was Jump and Jane Street, I think that headlines kind of announcing either pulling back or leaving the market. Was it all at once, or did you kind of notice that? Is anyone filling that void of providing market making services?
I don't think so. I don't think there's anybody really moving in. And it's also, it would be harder for existing market makers that are sticking around to scale up to fill the void because there's no borrow left after all, like the bilateral lenders got toasted. So you can't, like, it's not that easy to just be like, well, like I can fill this void and like do this larger, because like you really can't get access to the capital to do it.
Is there anyone with leverage left to make markets?
I mean, there's some bespoke borrow out there, but like the real sources of like liquidity for like the lending market are gone.
So how does someone, so I guess what does that do to the liquidity of books, at least during this time period until this is figured out?
It's just going to be bad. Like it's going to be bad for the foreseeable future.
And when people say that, I know there's kind of the retort is, oh, that should be huge markets. You're going to have a dislocation, bid-ask spread's going to blow out. So then people are going to have a lot of opportunity to make money. Do you subscribe to that, or think that's, BS?
I think that's true if the market turns around, right? Like if there's suddenly like a big like wave of like interest and like people like want to be like, like the crypto market in general is like pretty much like in a lull, right? Like there's not like a ton of people looking to do things. But like let's say like you have like a big wave of like interest and adoption and people are trying to come in and like, then there's going to be a great opportunity because there'll be a lot of trading volume and there'll be like real spread on it. Like the thing is also like volumes are really low. Like there's nobody who's doing anything either way. So it's like, yeah, fine. Like you might be collecting more, but like you're doing it on a smaller base of like trading volume.
What are you seeing from the kind of the institutional trading side? I know most people are kind of already internationally based. Are people moving if they were here in any sort, or has it always been kind of more of an international trading game?
So like most of the large shops have some presence overseas. I mean, you like hear of people like moving their whole operations there. I haven't seen it yet, but I do think like people are like debating. I don't think anyone's done it yet, like in mass, but there's like a world that like most of the larger shops like completely offshore.
And what's your take? So let's get to the cases. You got the Binance SEC headline, the SEC Coinbase headline the next day. It seems like the Binance case is a little bit messier. There's, allegations of fraud and money movement and commingling. Binance seems to be, the case that everybody's been waiting for, which is a token of security test.
Yeah, so I think it's worth noting that both of these were pretty well broadcast. Like Coinbase straight up said it, right? Like I forget when, but it was like on the order of like 2 or 3 months ago. Was like, hey, we got a Wells notice. Like everybody's like, all right, this is gonna like happen, right? Like, so this wasn't super surprising. I think people were like upset about the names that were like mentioned as like securities in the thing, but I don't know, they had to like put something. So, like I don't like that just because they put it in there doesn't mean it is, but like it's enough of like a concern. The Binance one also like same thing. Like the CFTC complaint was pretty clear that it was going to be like an SEC complaint as well, right? Like there was a lot of like. There's a lot of things in the CFTC one we were like, all right, like this will like also fall in SEC sort of land. I think like while like those things were like somewhat known, it's still like the market didn't like seeing them and like they didn't like some of the aggression in it. I think the bigger thing now is like, hey, will it be like a DOJ case tacked on to the Binance? Like people are like, I'm not a lawyer, but like people are like saying that there's a lot of things that rise to the level of criminality potentially mentioned in there. That would be like a DOJ sort of event. So I think that's like the big one everyone's like waiting around for.
Yeah, it does feel like we're recording this week. It's June 12th, and that's really been the rumor of what everyone came into this week waiting for, was if there was going to be a DOJ headline.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like when the CFTC one came out, they felt the same. Like everyone was like this isn't entirely like new, but I don't know. You feel like much more that it will happen. And it's a matter of like when as opposed to if. And then the thing is going to be like, all right, well, what does this mean? Does this mean Binance just like really like completely walls off like the US, like even more so than they're doing, and they just like don't deal with this, or do they pay a settlement and they like find a way to go forward? Like, it's unclear. I don't think Binance US survives. It seems like that's pretty much done. I mean, maybe they find a way to like just offer Bitcoin and ETH and like, but I don't know. But it doesn't seem like there's a world that's like coming out the other side of this.
So let's think about back to like when you were trading in, you know, prior cycles where you had these different international markets and people were trying to move stuff around. If the US just hypothetically becomes more isolated for the next couple of years while this is litigated, what happens to global liquidity? Do you think you see a disconnect where in some Asian market or European market in London, that Bitcoin's now the quoted price and the US price is kind of wacky compared to it?
The only thing that really does that is if the banking gets banged up. Like if it like actually becomes impossible to face like exchanges in dollars, then like, yeah, and then you have like a problem. But like as long as the pipes are still flowing, like it'll get edged out. I'm not too worried about that unless like there's a real ramp up, even more so than we already are, on the ability for exchanges to like facilitate the US banking system.
And how would you compare in prior prior actions? People were discussing when XRP, you know, was first notified, everyone just it was an immediate like runaway. But this time you have some exchanges delisting, other ones saying we're here for fighting it. How does it feel in prior actions where the government got involved?
I think it's just different because the exchanges are the ones, right? Like I think if like, let's say for instance, like there hadn't been an action against Binance or like Coinbase or anything like that, and like the SEC just came out and they're like, we think Solana is a security, right? Like the same way they do with XRP. Like I think Coinbase would be listed. I just think like now they're like, well, what's like I'm the one being hit here. Like what am I supposed to do, right? Like you can't, like they don't have any preventative measure they can sort of do. So like that's very much how it's like different.
Yeah.
And also I think like Coinbase views this as a little bit of an existential like threat. Like they kind of have to deal with this. This is not something they can just be like, all right, there's like, what's the risk reward? Like the risk is like you just don't operate at all.
Yeah. No, it definitely feels like in, you know, traditional finance, you might have a Wells notice and then the SEC does this investigation. And like with a bank, they say they settle some huge penalty and then they admit no wrongdoing and they get back to running their business. This does not seem like that type of case this time.
Yeah, it's very much like the future of their business and like what they're able to do.
Do you think, you mentioned the tokens listed and obviously people are reacting to them. Are you seeing that people trade those differently than the tokens that weren't listed?
Yeah, like the ones that were named in the complaints fell harder than ones not. It was pretty clear.
And do you think that's mostly a function of the forced selling, or is that also the whatever remaining liquidity was kind of it evaporating for those tokens?
I think it's both. I think you get hit on it, right? Like people pull back, people don't make the market, and like people have to sell, or they want to like reduce their exposure.
Yeah. So what are you doing nowadays? Like you starting to play more golf, or what are you actually trading?
I haven't played a golf yet. No, I mean, like, look, we do still like do some stuff. I mean, like, our biggest issue is like maintaining exchange connectivity and like also like making sure, like, I spent a lot of time this year just like getting banking over and over again, and like continuously like having banks fail. But like, so there's been like a lot of like operational things that sort of have gotten done. But I mean, a lot of it also is like starting to look at like DeFi as like a potential like only execution sort of way. That's not a great opportunity, but we're spending a lot of time on it. Like we're doing a fair amount on there. It makes it a lot harder. There's like a lot of challenges there, but we've built out a fair amount of infrastructure. We've burned like a couple of developer heads like on that now.
What percentage of like, whether it's market or like broad numbers is DeFi versus, centralized trading?
I don't know, like a big,
less than...
like in aggregate, I don't know. It's hard to know because the exchange volumes are like a little like iffy sometimes, but like for us, like it's like 5%, if that.
And do you think like when you see, like obviously you guys are doing it, you can kind of go wherever you want, but on the institutional side, have you seen any more interest in it?
No, opposite really. It's gotten like very quiet. I think like it's just like really hard if you live in a world where they're saying a lot of the L1s are potentially like securities to be like comfortable with being like, oh, like, well, what about like, I don't know, name your like favorite DeFi like sort of thing. Like that like looks a lot more even than, I think it makes it like really, the case for the institutional side to be touching DeFi gets harder.
Yeah. I do think you mentioned that the tokens they selected, I mean, someone posted a tweet that it was like, if you searched Coinbase, you would have ended up with a list and that matched. And then other people, that picture was in the case, but then the Binance list was different than the Coinbase case. So there was some overlap of like, which ones are definitely, in there.
Yeah.
Concert.
I'm not sure. I don't know. Like they're like the really bad way would be like, all right, like they actually have pending action against all those, right? And they were like, oh, well, we know that, like, you know what I'm saying? And they're like, use that list. Or it could just be like they grabbed like the first 12 that showed up or something. It's unclear. They're going to have to explain that. But they did just sort of grab like a random handful. But they've done this before too. Like when they brought that other case against the insider trading guy, right? Wasn't super familiar with the case, but yeah, there was like 6 assets that they claim were like securities as like part of the case, but they were like very random. And I get that they were the ones he traded, but like there wasn't a lot of like continuity of like why those were selected, in my opinion, at the time. But nobody cared because they were all like very small, so like it wasn't like it didn't get as much outroar.
Yeah, I felt that this is the most powerful case because obviously got everyone's attention by naming everything on the top except for Ethereum, which I think people find it's interesting whether it's legal or not. I know it's not potentially precedent, but I would have thought that if the case that they made on CNBC was we only need one of these to be a security to get our other case won, I actually would have expected to see some like random altcoin that I'd never heard of that you're like, they probably don't even have lawyers behind it or something. It was interesting to me that they went after some of the largest names that probably do have the funding and have been working on this presumably for a period of time.
I think they're also trying to kick the hornet's nest, right? I think they're trying to like cause a little outrage.
What do you think? Why?
Because I think there's like a part of US policy that just like views this industry as like a nuisance.
And so I think that the part I hear you, and I've been trying to think of like regulation by banning something or getting someone so fired up. I mean, it's a powerful move, but I do wonder if it's something you like, can completely backfire in your face. I know everyone's bearish and it's a winter and everyone's worried now, but it does seem to me that if you push so far, you get someone to an existential threat where there's no settlement. Now it's one way of the future or another way. You end up with a really brutal outcome. Not just for the industry you're trying to ban, but potentially losing the regulatory oversight over getting in front of a judge who says, no, that's officially not a security. And this is where the lines start and stop.
Yeah. I mean, but it's got to happen eventually.
So you're excited for it?
I don't know. It's going to be a bit. It's going to be this stuff's not going to get solved in the next couple of years. I don't think, unless Congress acts, but it does not seem that they do.
So what's your timeline on when we get some resolution of which way we're going?
I mean, if you made me a market on 18 months, I'd probably take the over.
Okay. What if I made you a market on 24 months?
I would still take the over.
36?
I'd probably take the under. So somewhere between 2 and 3. That's my guess. I mean, when was Ripple? Ripple was 2020.
It feels like 5 years.
2020, because it was before. No, because it was before Gensler was in office. So it had to be before the election. So it was, I don't know, call it the fall of 2020, I want to say.
Let's see.
So we're 3 years into that now.
Yeah. And that's against the protocol itself. See, the thing with the exchanges, though, is they have a real clear business reason to settle. So that's like the one thing of making that existential. Whereas if you go against a bank like Wells Fargo or something with opening up the bank accounts on behalf of people, they knew it was bad, but they knew they had to find a resolution of some sort to get their business back. Here, it would have seemed to me that the exchanges potentially would have settled for a huge number to get clarity, but that just doesn't seem in the cards from this type of regulatory regime.
Unless they think like settling would make it so impossible to operate going forward, right? Yeah. Like I think if Coinbase is like we can only trade Bitcoin and ETH potentially, then we don't have a business. Or they definitely don't have a business that's like the public valuation that it's at now. Like that's for sure, right?
Yeah. And how does it what does it look like on trading days of like how much how do you look at how much volume Bitcoin, like, so if Bitcoin and ETH make up 90% of the market cap, what do you think it makes up of trading volume on those exchanges? I know we don't see the data, but
I don't know, it's probably about the same. It's probably pretty close.
Yeah. No, I mean, it does feel like they're fighting for the industry's existence more than, I mean, they're also, obviously their business is completely intertwined with the industry's existence. I totally agree with you.
Yeah. I mean, just like, but also like Bitcoin and ETH are like, you don't make a ton of money trading them anymore. Like they're very much commoditized, like pun intended, right? Like there's not a ton of like, it's very cheap and easy to offer that. I mean, Coinbase's bread and butter is still like charging very high retail trading fees, but that would be much harder for them to defend as a business.
So so you said you were starting to explore DeFi. What else? Are you starting to collect NFTs now and start hanging up on your walls?
No, I haven't done it. How's the NFT world? I haven't even delved into that. Is it having its same existential crisis?
I mean, it's Yes and no. It definitely feels out of the fray a little bit because obviously there's no one bringing, an SEC case against a bunch of like, animal pictures. But definitely the demand, the fall off of everything has happened across the board. So it's a winter lull everywhere. I think that the good news is that the people that were really excited about stuff and wanted to participate obviously stay around. It definitely does clear out the people that showed up and had, like grifts or scams, or it does. I do like that the noise has turned down. I feel like you meet more interesting people that actually are trying to figure out what to do with this stuff, and less people that are here to like go raise a token for themselves. Now the whole meme coin thing, that kind of felt like it was a complete opposite direction of the quiet down phase.
Yeah, I mean that's what happens when people are bored though that are here.
It's bored, but it feels. I mean, thankfully we're both not lawyers, but it feels extremely dangerous to be doing something like that. I mean, the whole anonymous thing. Obviously, the always thing I found interesting with Bitcoin is that part of the strong argument has been, well, the anonymity saved all, which I always thought was kind of a funny. I mean, it's super interesting in a lot of ways, and obviously it is the beginning of everything. But it's a weird thing to kind of celebrate. It's like, oh, that works. So if a bunch of people launch a piece of protocol, but you never know who they are, and there's no, and if you don't have a Twitter account, and if you don't have a pre-sale, and you find a way to just bootstrap yourself, then technically you're a commodity.
I don't know about that, but like you're closer to
either.
it than not. Yeah, it's tough.
I always wonder if when they firmly came out, I mean, I want to see the industry find a way forward. I want to see some sort of regulation that allows people to build stuff. However, I guess this kind of gets this other point of this Bitcoin maxis being happy about all these cases. I think that's where I'm going, is that there's this, if I always wonder if they ever regret saying Bitcoin was definitely not a security, because it began to create this, okay, well, if that isn't, then what else isn't? Question is my point.
Yeah, I always wonder if like the regulatory stance on that was like, this is pretty clear not a security, and like we got to like throw these people a bone, so we'll give them this. And then like in the back of my mind, like everyone just like ran with it and they like took it further, and like now they are like, right now we got to like rein this thing back in. Yeah, I don't know. It was interesting that like Gensler's like latest thing that he sent to CNBC like even like didn't include Bitcoin as like being useful, right? He's like, we already have like digital currencies and they're like the dollar and euro, and yet like he didn't even mention Bitcoin this time, which like historically he had always been like, that was like, oh, like I think that's why they did the futures ETF, right? It was like, all right, like can you guys like shut up now, like, but then they didn't. I don't know. It's weird. I think they're getting more hostile though, I would say.
What's your
a lot of
take
people
on?
lost a lot of money, right? Like there's also that. Yeah, I think that way, and they're like, this whole thing, this industry is a nuisance. Like we got to like just clean this up. There's definitely that line of thought among certain people in government.
Yeah, there's definitely, obviously, yeah, FTX. You have scams, you have grifters in the space all the time. There hasn't been any industry that popped up and there was so much wealth creation and destruction so rapidly. And the things kind of pass a lot of people's duck tests, where if you're not in crypto, then you're like, and let's just say you could lay out the best legal argument and say this isn't a security. And then you show someone your Coinbase account or whatever, you open up an exchange and you see this thing in a portfolio and it's trading. It looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck.
Yeah,
and like, right. That must be a duck. I mean, for the average person, I don't think they're spending as much time in the space trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And so it seems to me like public narrative is one way. And that's why Gensler's on CNBC and making up, TikTok videos. However, when you get in front of a judge, you're gonna have to point to case law and precedent to say why this is a security or why it isn't. That's a whole different game.
Yeah, I think this stuff's gonna be much different in the court, right? For sure.
What's your take on the so like I you've been in it much longer than me, this idea that the Bitcoin maxis are happy that this is all happening, that's like a cleaning and purification of the system, and that Bitcoin is kind of untouchable and that this is all good for Bitcoin?
So I think my counter to that is like, there's been a tremendous amount of like capital inflow into like the larger ecosystem, like from things non-Bitcoin related. And if you lose that, I think like the net is it's probably a drag on Bitcoin anyway. That's my counter.
I've tried to read through some of the arguments, and it feels a bit more religious than
right. Like it's whether or not like it's like if you believe that like there's going to be like a world that like Bitcoin actually replaces fiat currency, and like that's the inevitability, then this is all a sideshow till you get there. But if you don't agree on that original maxim, then like it's hard to have like the same path.
Yeah,
I think that's like where. I don't know. That's like where it's hard to get there if you're like not. Yeah, I'm just saying, but that's like the logic I take away from it at least.
No, it reminds me of people trading like, precious metals in the woods of a state or something and saying like, well, we have our own currency and we don't have to worry about the dollar, the yen, or the euro. That's all true. But there's only so many people in the woods trading, precious metals.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much a gold analogy. Like, I don't think it's not like history like just was created with this like cohort of people.
Yeah. No, are you seeing it? And what's your take on the private markets? So are you seeing people, are there infrastructure plays? Are there new technologies that you're interested in that are either related to trading or kind of around that space that are enticing you?
There's like a handful of people that are looking to raise effectively like aggregators to venues now. Like, here's like the problem is like getting access to the exchanges is becoming harder. There's like a lot of people who are building like sort of like intermediaries to it. And like my concern with all of them though is they were mentioned in the CFTC complaint against Binance, not by name, but like the functionality. And I'm not entirely sure that that's going to work as like a path, but like that is like a piece of infrastructure that like people are trying to actively build out right now.
And how does that work? There's a one main relationship at all of the exchanges, and then they become customers of a secondary piece of software.
Yeah, I mean, usually they're like set up like a prime brokerage model, right, where you face the prime, and then they like face the exchange. Like some of them let you actually like open an API like account, like a sub account on like an exchange and like execute that way. But like that's sort of the same idea though, is like you face them and not the exchange.
Right. And so, I mean, prime brokerage would be a good thing to see added. Obviously, Genesis was the biggest, and that didn't go well because of, a lot of reasons. But do you see that as a possible business model that could work?
I don't know if regulatory wise that's going to work. Like, I don't know if like the US regulators are going to be like, oh, you face this prime instead of Binance, so like that's okay. Like, I don't know if that's ever going to be like kosher. Yeah. Like prime brokerage in general, I think makes sense. The problem is like you have to take exposure to all these exchanges, right? And like they blow up a lot.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know. It's tough.
Are there, okay, so we got aggregators. Are there other areas of tech? Or I mean, you mentioned DeFi. What part of DeFi are you interested in?
I mean, like we've been like really, like we've always been involved in like the DEXs as like on the derivatives. We always thought that as an angle that has like not been working great as a trade, but like we still sort of are pretty involved in it.
And are you involved in trading on the DEXs or owning the DEXs themselves?
Both. We trade a fair amount on them and like try to provide liquidity. And then like we own the underlyings.
And have you seen any volume? I mean, obviously it was anemic anyways, but have you seen any positive gains and volume trends?
Not really.
Or is it still decreasing? Or is it flat, at least flatlined?
I think it's pretty stable, like as a percentage of like the sort of open interest for like the derivatives site. See, the thing is like, there's a world like where like, all right, I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but let's say Binance shuts, right? Like that volume goes somewhere. Does it go to DeFi or does it go to like the next Asian exchange? And like what really has happened is it's gone to like the next Asian exchange. Like it is not like creeped into DeFi in mass.
And when you look at like back to like kind of your market thoughts for people who are trying to trade, maybe this is their first bear market, they've been through something. You've talked a lot about surviving or existing. What do you tell people who haven't been through this type of period and just went through this massive boom bust cycle?
It doesn't like have to be the entirety of what you're doing. Like, all right, so here's like the one thing, and I tell this to the junior guys, is like you're gonna get periods where there's like nothing going on, or like there's not like a ton of opportunity. It's like take that time because you're probably like you're gonna want it when like the market's flying and like you have nothing to do and you're like angry that there's like a bull market now. So like I don't know, like take the time when you get it.
So CMS is just taking a lot more vacation time.
Yeah, I mean take it now when we don't need you.
That's good. What will you be looking for? Like, what are the things you're monitoring, like your green shoots? Obviously, we've set out your timeline. We have 24 to 36 months before we get any regulatory cover, but are there things in the market that you look to of like, if this starts to pick up again, then you'll bring the guys back from vacation and say, it's time? Yeah.
I mean, like, look, if you see like a spark of like real interest in any region, whether it's like Asia, the US, Europe, like whatever, like for whatever reason, in like some sub pocket of it, like you'll see it. It'll be pretty quick. It'll be apparent. And then like, you're like, all right, like we got something going on again.
All right, Dan. So it's been pretty dark. It's a low part in the market. Before we wrap up with you, what are the positive things that you're seeing across crypto, maybe globally?
So I think like stablecoin issuance for Tether is still going up. USDC has gone down. Most of that's gone into Tether, but like there's still demand. Like stablecoins haven't cratered the same way we saw in like 2018. So I think that's interesting. Hopefully that's not for like some nefarious reason. But the other thing is like there does seem to be some public interest in Hong Kong and potentially like larger China towards courting some of these businesses to come. And to like have like that's been the most hostile regime, and that seems to be becoming less hostile. I'm not fully sold on it yet. Like I'm always skeptical of anything coming out of that region because it has been so like harsh in the past. So I don't know. Like that's like a positive. It's like, all right, maybe like this is loosening up a little bit. Other than that though, like I say this, there hasn't been comprehensive like crypto bill in the US, negative or positive. So like that's good, right? Like it's not such a bad thing that they're like, we got to ban this thing. But it's also like not such like a great thing where they're like, we got to like do something to protect this. It's kind of just like apathetic still, which is better than negative. But I would like to see something happen on like the stablecoin side, maybe by year end or something. Like I don't know. I'd like to see some recognition from Congress on the industry somewhere, which I think we'll get.
What do you think your timing on anything, right way, for better or for worse, for that matter, for Congress to act?
I think you get something by year end, but I think it's going to be stablecoin related.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's a huge step forward. I think that if you just follow crypto Twitter, the kind of the headlines, it sounds like there's an all-out war against banning, crypto. And then I think from people talking to Congress, to your point, it's more apathetic, where it's like, yes, we'll get to this, but this isn't their top priority by any means.
It is not a priority. It is not a priority for the majority of the voting public. It is like, I think we live in a bubble where we think this stuff matters a lot more. It is really not like, it is not like an issue. It's definitely not like a voting issue for people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's this, obviously there's the war on army against crypto. I was trying to think about this too, of, there's definitely issues that are single issue where people there's anti and there's for, there's gun rights, there's abortion, there's topics that there's clearly a for and against camp. I know there's a lot of people, we get to meet them that are for crypto, but I haven't met someone who's truly anti-crypto. I've met someone who thinks you're wasting your time, you should move on, you should build something else. But I rarely find people that are like anti-crypto. So I've always been curious from a political standpoint, back to the kind of kick the hornets, like what the goal is. I
think they want it like effectively either banned or neutered in a case that it might as well be banned.
Yeah. All right, well, let's say we're going to end on a positive note, so I can't end on that. Give us one more take that's worth closing the show out on.
I mean, like forest for the trees, like everything's still pretty much working, right? Like we lost some exchanges along the way, but like, I don't know, like the prices are still higher than they were before COVID. And like, I don't know, we're here. I don't know. It's not that it's like, if you zoom out, it's not that bad.
I like that. That's a great place to end. Dan, thank you for joining us. This has been great.
Yeah, no worries.